You're tuned into the Online Prosperity Show, where leaders come to turn their lived experience into lasting impact. So whether that's building authority, creating new income streams, or leaving a legacy that outlives them. And today's episode is for anyone who actually feels that they've done well, but it still looks like something is missing, or they still want to do something that matters. And if you're watching this on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, or wherever you are right now, I encourage you to hit that subscribe button, because this show is the number one place to go behind the scenes and get the insight on how real experts are building meaningful and profitable lives. Now, my guest today has helped thousands, if not a lot more people, of leaders to write books. But one of her weekly rituals is going to completely change how you see her. She apparently attends burlesque classes with her daughter, and it actually means she can help you write a best-selling book and outdance you all at the same time. I can't wait to jump into this episode with our guests. So today we're joined by Kim Vermaak, a book coach, publisher, speaker, and the founder of Write, Learn, andEarn. Now, Kim, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's really a great pleasure to be here. I don't quite know if I'm going to outdance everyone, but I can give them a lesson encouraged.
Fantastic. Well, you should see how a lot of people, stop having fun in their business. So it doesn't necessarily mean burlesque, but at least some sort of movement that will help them start enjoying the kind of work that they're doing. So hopefully we'll get to figure out how you are able to do that for them. Now, for those that are watching right now, she actually helps leaders turn their stories into books that build authority, income, and legacy. And there's also a twist to this story, because Kim didn't plan this life. She actually launched her first book before South Africa went into lockdown. And that was, the time where everybody was trying to cough into their elbows. And there she was, setting up a whole new life for herself. And one day she was in brand management and corporate gifting, and the next, the world had shut down and books became her lifeline. So for those that are watching right now, I've got a question for you. Have you ever had a moment where maybe life forced you into a completely different path than the one that you had planned? I want you to drop a yes in the comments below, and then we'll see what your story has brought for you. Now, Kim, I could go on and talk about things I'm not even qualified to talk about. So for 20 plus years, you were knee deep in brand management and marketing. You're also doing awards and also some leadership roles in between. I mean, obviously on paper, everybody would have wanted to be in that role. What did your life actually feel like back then?
I've been in this industry for such a long time that it started to become monotonous, but over and above that, we had massive changes in our industry, which meant that relationship building, which is one of my key strengths, was no longer important. And so you were chasing deadlines, you were underquoting other people, you all of a sudden had to become the financer of your clients because they wanted longer and longer terms. And I was really very unhappy, but stuck. I didn't feel like I could get out. The bulk of our family income came from this business. And for a season, my husband also worked inside the business. But I really wasn't happy at that point. So I wanted a way out. I just didn't know how.
I can imagine, because you see, when you're fish don't see the water that they swim in. And when you're in the industry, but if you start seeing the cracks, then that means something must have actually been going on for a while. Did you maybe have an inside voice at some point saying there's got to be more than this, even before you started seeing those cracks?
There was a day that I was busy working on a quotation, and I had a really good work ethic, but I had not been looking after myself. I wasn't drinking enough water, and so I developed a very bad bladder infection. The infection was so bad that I could actually feel myself sweating and shaking as I was supposed to be doing the work. And one of my key clients had contacted me and she said to me, Kim, I've got a proposal that needs to come out. It needs to come out within like 48 hours. I want images, costs, a storyline, the whole toot, give that to me. And I was really struggling through that quotation. And my eldest daughter, she said to me, Mommy, you're actually very sick. You need to go lie down. You need to take some medication. And I said, I can't not do this quote. This is our most important client. We get the bulk of our income from this particular client. So she said to me, okay, Mommy, well, what can I do? So I said, just keep on bringing water to me so that I can flush the infection out of my system. And then as soon as that quote was done, I went to go lie down. And, very shortly after we completed that order, it was a strange order because we got the deposit in on the Saturday, and then we had to brand 350 packs. And this was for presidents of countries. So it was, the bags, the notebooks, the USBs, there were a whole bunch of things in there. And I even was packing those bags myself until 2:00 in the morning. We got the deposit on the Saturday. We had to deliver on the Tuesday morning. It was insane. And, my husband helped us with the delivery. He packed the trailer and dropped it off at the client, but he was an hour later than what he anticipated. And the client phoned me and was screaming down the phone about how unprofessional we were. And I thought, I worked through my illness. I left my children in the house with my eldest daughter until 2:00 in the morning to get the order out because of your bad planning, and you're screaming at me. So yeah, that was a big moment.
Oh, I can imagine. And obviously from what you're saying, Kim, it looks like your family somehow was involved in obviously the whole process, delivering, and just the emotional care that your daughter gave you by supplying you with water, just so you could at least go through this quotation. How much of a strain did this job put on your actual family while you were still doing it?
It put a massive strain on our family because, it's really up and down. The deadlines are crazy. And so sometimes you want to do things with your family, but now you cannot do them. If I look at the contrast to when I started writing, when my father was diagnosed with kidney failure and he was in hospital, I had a very different kind of business plan then. I could fly down to the Eastern Cape where my parents lived, and I could spend the last few days with him. And I didn't have massive deadlines. I didn't have guilt. I was just in a completely different place. And in fact, the night before he passed away, I wrote a death scene in one of my books that's still going to be coming out. And that just was very cathartic to me. I listened to music. I emotionally said goodbye to him. That was round about, it was after visiting hours. So it was somewhere between 9:00 and 10:00. And then the following morning at 3:00 in the morning, he had passed. So just that process, I wouldn't have been able to do that in the other business. It just would have been impossible.
So, and also sorry to hear about that. But obviously it has given you some content for you to then maybe honor his life through, like you said, the books that you're writing and stuff like that. And why writing? Was that something that was a pastime, or was that something that you've always wanted to do as a kid? I always have notes written by my daughter, sending me things every now and again, makes things for me. Was that something you always wanted to do as a kid?
Not really. I went through a very difficult season in my life where I wrote poetry as a way of processing things, but I never thought that I would become a writer at all. I did write for my business, so I would write articles and things like that, but that was just really to build credibility online. And then one day I posted an article onto Facebook, something that actually happened in our family. I called it the Great Kitten Rescue. So we had these little kittens that went up this tree and they couldn't get down, and we sent my husband up to fetch them. And in that process, he was clearing away debris for the branches, and we were saying, go a little bit to the left, go to the right. And so he got to them. And while I was watching this, I thought to myself, there's a lesson in this. You know, firstly, you have to have a vision for what you want. Secondly, you have to have the right team that act as cheerleaders for you. And the third thing is sometimes you've got to clear away some things to get to what you want. So I wrote this article about it on Facebook, and a woman that I hadn't been in contact with for about 10 years. And so I call this as a miracle moment, because the way that the algorithms work, if you're not regularly keeping contact with people, they don't see your stuff anymore. And so I had written this article. She reached out to me and she said to me, and she had been a supplier of mine in the corporate gifting industry 10 years before that. And she asked me, did you write the article? And I said, yes. And so she said, yourself, you didn't like copy and paste it from somewhere else? I said, no, I wouldn't do that. And so she said to me, you shouldn't be in the industry that you're in. You need to be in the writing industry.
Wow.
And I said to her, no, I'm not doing that. So just a little bit of background information. I'm adopted. And I was in foster care with the same family for over 10 years. But because of the abandonment and the adoption, I have a very low tolerance for rejection. So I said to this friend of mine, Nats, I don't have that kind of tolerance for rejection. I'm not going to send out thousands of manuscripts and then like everyone says no, and then like after 2 years of trying someone says yes. I just can't deal with that. And she said to me, you're not going to do that. You're going to self-publish. I'm going to hold your hand through part of the process, and we'll do this together. So for me, it was the December holidays, and I wrote the first 42,000 words. Then I got a little bit of an emotional wobbly about it, and then I finally finished the book. But it was my father being ill that was the catalyst for me to say, finish up.
Absolutely. Now, there's a lot to unpack there up until we get to the kittens, which is obviously a cute story that then ended you know, in where you ended up as. But you did mention earlier on that you were writing poems as a way to process things. Would that have had, you know, a connection to what you just mentioned about your upbringing, then that is what your outlet was at that moment?
It was definitely an outlet. I only did it for a short period of time. I wrote over 100 poems within a space of a few months, and it was just my way of processing the world. But it was never intended for me to use as a form of income. It was just for me to process feelings.
But now that you're all famous and, you know, we're all waiting in line to get an autograph, if you publish those 100 poems, I think they'll do amazing.
They probably would, but I've lost all of them.
Oh, fantastic. All right. So obviously this story is the one that really then put you on the center stage. It was this cute kittens that, you know, you guys were trying to rescue. And there's all these lessons that you gathered from this, you know, the whole vision, the team, and just clarity that you need in order for you to get to that which you want. Which of these lessons have you used yourself now that you are in the position you're in?
So the books that I originally wrote were medieval fantasy series. And what I did, so this is just a little bit of history, is that my middle daughter was a very adventurous young lady. Adventurous to the extreme that we were constantly terrified and reprimanding her. Don't climb on the roof. Don't do this. You know, there were a lot of intense things. And so I was always worried that with all of this reprimanding, because we were terrified, she might start feeling that she's a problem as a person. And so I decided to create a fantasy character based on her personality. And one of the things that she does is she's got a great connection with animals. So I once found her with a bird in her hand, and I assumed that the bird couldn't fly because we do have cats. So I would have thought that someone would have injured the bird's wing. But as I approached her, the bird flew out of her hand. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. Now, if I was to take that characteristic of hers and amplify it into the fantasy world, I would then call her a whisperer, and you get horse whisperers. But I thought, what was the biggest flying creature you could get in fantasy world? And that was dragons.
Dragons.
So I created 4 series of dragons. But going back to your question, is those books, although they're fantasy books, I have taken lessons that I've learned in life and injected them into the books. So, for example, book number 2, which is The Fire Within the Storm, that deals with unplanned pregnancy, with parents who've got alcoholism, self-belief, self-worth, and those threads are put into the book so that when you do read it, it can be a way of you processing very real human emotions. And in that particular book, because of the unplanned pregnancy, it is a book that someone who's faced the really difficult decision of having an unplanned pregnancy or maybe having a termination of pregnancy, it is a way for them to safely process some of the emotions that they have.
And from what I'm gathering, your family has been the greatest source of most of your content and context. And so by you referring to how people can process their emotions, was that in reference to somebody close to you or somebody that you know, or was that all from imagination?
Actually, the characters are from imagination, but the situations that they face were based on very real people. So my mom, my adopted mother, she had a mixed heritage background. So her biological father was Jewish and her biological mother was German. And her mother was a teenager when she fell pregnant. And this was 5 years after World War II. So you can imagine that cultural mix was not, it was really frowned upon. And her maternal grandmother had said to this young teenager, her granddaughter, you can come and live with us, because she was quite destitute. You can come and live with me, but not with that child. And so my mother was then given up for adoption. For me, I was abandoned as a child, and then I was adopted. But as an adult, I met a lot of young women who had either been forced to give up their babies for adoption or they had a termination of pregnancy. One of the women that I met, when the father found out that she was pregnant, he tried to strangle her. And it was very, very intense emotion. So people tend to be very polarized with these kinds of things. And in the book, I wanted to show that there's more than one side to a story, that what you think you know is not always what the reality is.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing that with us. So is this the book that you launched literally on the day before lockdown?
Correct. That was the first one. The first one was The Last of the Silver Wings. So it was the first of the series. But yes, one day. In fact, we were not even sure we were going to have that book launch. It was at a young adults and children's book fair. And they said to us, you know what, take some masks with you just in case. It might be on, it might be off, but there it was. And the next day it was over.
Oh, what sort of emotions did you feel in that moment? Was it fear? Was it relief, panic? Was it excitement? Because nobody knew what was going on, and yet you've got a new thing that you want to put out there in the world.
You know what was an interesting thing is that we were going to get the royalties from the book 10 days later. And then as soon as the president announced lockdown, my event coordinators who were either asked me to quote on gifts or they had already purchased, they started contacting me and saying, we might need to postpone. And then eventually when it looked like this thing wasn't going to continue, then I had one lady say, I need you to refund us the deposit. And that's when I realized we were in serious trouble. And 10 days after the event, I got my royalties from that book launch.
Oh, wow.
And something happened in my mind. It wasn't enough to feed a family. It wasn't enough to fill your car, full of petrol or anything like that. But what it did show me was that if you have an asset and you sell the asset, generally the asset goes away. You don't get income from it again. But a book, you can sell it over and over again and it's still going to escalate in value.
That's a very different paradigm shift to what a lot of people think and assume what you have, because this is no longer just a product. It now becomes, like you say, a source of income and an identity. And during that time, did you get any other money while things were shut down? Because most people's jobs were obviously cut off at that time.
I didn't get income in that time. In fact, our church had to start sending us food parcels. And we were not alone. In fact, that space that I had the book fair at, that was at a prestigious school in Johannesburg. And to put it into context, their rugby field cost them over R1 million just to do the draining for the rugby field. That school was sending food parcels to families that attended that school. So it was a really difficult, terrifying time. But I knew that at the end of the month, if I had made sales, Amazon, which was one of the bookstores that I was in, they would pay me at the end of that month. And that, like clockwork, you were not chasing the money and saying, oh, it's now 30 days, when are you going to pay? That was a massive difference for me. I mean, I remember when I was in the corporate gifting industry, there was one client I waited like about almost 3 months. The order had been a massive, massive order, but I waited so long for that money because we were basically financing the client. But I didn't have that in books. Yes, some bookstores, bricks and mortar bookstores, will sometimes pay you around about 60 days or 90 days after they've sold the book. But when you have a trusted digital partner, that means that the money comes in regularly.
Oh, absolutely. I love the feeling of that. And also just a little bit of a turnaround and that silver line to this cloud that had just happened to you guys. Because I viscerally remember, during the pandemic, we were one of the most locked down cities in the world here in Melbourne. And I can only imagine, people from other places where systems are not as set up as it is here. And if you hadn't created this, like you say, an asset, which was now sort of subsidizing a little bit for your income, things would have gone a whole different way. So obviously this created a new identity in you, right? Because once you started getting money from something you had created, I think this would have changed you, even though it wasn't groundbreaking or life-changing money. But the fact that somebody has seen your talent, your work, and decided to pay for it, that kind of puts you in a whole different way of being, right?
Yes, it is absolutely an amazing feeling. But even when you've written a lot of books, you still get imposter syndrome. I have to sometimes go into Amazon and look at my high star ratings and read those reviews back to myself. Because although I'm now writing book number 14, and this is completely a different genre, I'm currently writing about postpartum depression. Although I've done that, I still have those moments when I question myself, and that's pretty normal. All of my book coaching clients have that. But even though I'm coaching them, I still have to navigate those feelings myself.
You mentioned, a buzzword here, imposter syndrome. What does that look like for those that might have it and not quite realize when it's knocking on their front door?
You tend to make excuses and you frame them as reasons. You tend to not take action in the areas that can move you forward in that particular area. And whatever that is, whether you're a wrestler, a public speaker, or an author, you're not going to do things. And when I was tutoring as a student, I used to see this. When students would say, I'm not going to study for the exam because I'm going to fail in any case. So that's what imposter syndrome will do to you. It will stop you taking action in the areas of your purpose and your dreams.
See, maybe you're talking about the self there, the regulation of the self, where it's you having that imposter feeling. But what if it's the people that are around you? Okay, so let's say, case in point, your family was sort of used to you being in that business, which was the one that was supplying the income, and yet you're telling them, okay, we're gonna leave this and now we're gonna eat off of my pen. How is that accepted by the people around you?
So it is a big shift, but what I had done is, while I was writing the first book, because I generally am an all-in kind of person, when I was writing the first book, I split my morning up into three-hour slots. Now, I used to struggle a lot with insomnia, and then I heard John Maxwell say the one day, work always produces more results than worry. So I thought, well, I'm up already at 3 o'clock in the morning. Instead of lying around in bed, just having those ruminating thoughts that are not good for you, I would get up and then I would start writing, and I would spend an hour writing. I would spend an hour researching the world in which I was writing. So, for argument's sake, in my first book, people are not drinking out of glasses. They are drinking out of carved out wooden drinking vessels, because that's what they were using in the taverns at that time. So you've got to know your world very well. And then the third thing that I was doing was researching how to run a good self-publishing business. And when I was doing that, I stumbled across a community called 20 Books for 50K. And their philosophy was that if you had 20 books and you were doing marketing effectively, you could earn $50,000 per month. Now, there's a lot of steps in between that. But when I looked at that, because we were self-employed and we were running a business, pensions and those kinds of things were not really high on our radar, because we were throwing all the money back into the business. So don't do that mistake. But that's where we were at. And because of the level of work that I was doing, I thought to myself, there is no retirement plan for me. I could just die of a heart attack in front of my computer and no one's going to know until they smell me. So I didn't want to be in that space where I was working and working and working. And then when I spoke to my husband and I told him about this plan, and he realized that books could be a retirement plan for a lot of people, there was the switch. And so he said to me, look, the kids have got to get to school in the morning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make breakfast every morning and I will take the children to school. And then when I get back, then it's normal work time. So I'd already learned so much before I launched that first book that I was now starting to capitalize on that. And of course, my family knew it's COVID. We can't earn money as corporate gifting. So I then started supplementing my income with consulting, because I'd already learned so much about launching a book, how you get onto Amazon, how you get a temporary bestseller status. And so I had other people contacting me and saying, I know someone who's written a book, they want to know what you know. And so I would consult to supplement the income further. And eventually that turned into Write, Learn, and Earn.
Absolutely. Now, you did mention something that, your husband had this paradigm shift, which led him to now start believing that books were a literal retirement package. And for me, books are a way of creating some sort of legacy of, the work that you have done and documenting some sort of success that you have achieved. Now, you are now talking in your work, which is, I think, part of what really brought us to you. You're talking less external success to more of legacy. And what does, first of all, legacy actually mean to you in a real human way?
So some people say that legacy is something that happens when you die. You've left your family with this or that financial means, a business, something you pass on from that perspective. But to me, legacy is actually the ripple effects of everything that you do. So if you take something like if you litter, you throw garbage down on the ground, you are building a legacy for a polluted world, and the legacy you're leaving for your children is evolving as you are doing it, every day's actions. You can leave an emotional legacy. So those people who feel the need to be sitting in a psychologist couch week after week because of some kind of trauma that they experienced when they were younger. That trauma has left its mark on their life. The people who inflicted that trauma have left a legacy of trauma on someone's life. So legacy is much bigger than what we imagine. Just this week, I also train on emotional intelligence. Sometimes people say to me, why emotional intelligence and authorship? So I said, well, actually, you have to have a lot of emotional intelligence to write because you've got to connect with people. So I love training on emotional intelligence because I get real-time stories from people. And there was one woman that said that she had been chased out of the office by someone that she delivered bad news to. And she is still months after that, she's so traumatized by that person saying, get out of my office, that she almost can't function from that perspective. So his knee-jerk reaction has left a legacy in her life. He might never remember that conversation. He might never see her again, but it's left a legacy. And so legacy is something that we need to think about while we are alive and not when we're writing out our will.
There's a statement that says people would forget what you said, but they don't forget how you made them feel. Is how you made them feel also part of that living legacy that you're talking about?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, there's a certain culture, which I'm not going to name the culture, but there's a certain culture that finds it very difficult to say no to their children. And I've actually seen this. Sometimes the kids, they feel like little terrorists because they're getting away with so much naughtiness. But when I look at that particular culture, they are very accomplished business people. And one of the emotional challenges that we have from a sales perspective is that we can't deal with no. We don't like rejection. So when you are a parent and you keep on saying no to your kids all the time or finding fault with everything that they do, nitpicking, you are leaving an emotional legacy with that person. The way that they feel translates into the future. And one of the questions that you asked was about family. So if you have a culture of seeing all the faults in your family, those children, if they're stepping out, they are going to struggle to step out into a new thing. They're going to struggle to be entrepreneurs or writers because the emotions are always going to be pulling them back and saying, what if this fails?
And that way of being ends up becoming a belief. And once a belief is set, then they can't, undo it unless they actually maybe get some help, to relieve that sort of belief system. And talking of beliefs, you have said that book writing isn't about the words that you use. Like, it is about you immersing yourself into that world and being a part of it. Like you were explaining about the cups, that they are not just cups, they're wooden devices that people drink out of. And you say it's not about words, it's about a belief. Where do you see most aspiring authors maybe self-sabotaging when it comes to that?
So generally on my book coaching programs, I've got a 6-month book coaching program, and people will get the first draft out. And when they need to do the rewrites, they implode. They really, really struggle with that. So what will happen when you write a book the first time, we always say, you can always edit rubbish, but you can't edit nothing. So people will start out and then they'll question themselves and like, gosh, is it really any good? They try and correct themselves a lot while they're doing the process. And I always say, right from the heart, we're going to correct it later. And then I also say, by you making mistakes in this book, you are actually supporting someone else's family, and that's the editors, because editors earn a living by helping to refine your book. But from an emotional perspective, if they're really struggling to see that they have the ability to add value, they're not going to do the rewrites. They're going to finish the first draft, they're going to leave it in their shelf, and they're not going to try and correct the areas that need to be corrected. And a book is a product. So you have quality control, and the editing is quality control, but someone with imposter syndrome sees editing as an affirmation that they were not good enough.
I blame school on that, Kim, because half of the things that we needed to hand in at school, they had to be correct. And if you didn't, you'd have to write corrections. And somebody thinks, if I've already written a book, how am I going to be able to correct that? So, and now I see why people called you a strategist, an expert, or some people said you were an encourager, and you offered them inspiration, because so many people, when they're told no, like you say, they would just, curl into fetal position and maybe go back in their shell and not want to see the light of day again.
So an interesting thing that I say to a lot of the people that I'm coaching, when you were at school and you needed to go to the bathroom, you had to put up your hand and you had to ask permission. Now, I know that we can't have kids just running all crazy over there because a teacher does need to teach. But if you are asking permission for a basic survival part of your body, and you buy into that, I have to ask permission for everything, then that means you're going to struggle to write, because now you are asking for permission to take your wisdom and to put it into the world out there. And those are self-limiting beliefs that I have to battle with my clients. Sometimes I get very direct. The one lady said to me, "You're so harsh." Because when I was reading her manuscript, one of the things that she said is that, there's so many times when I've gotten scared and I've quit. I've withdrawn before someone can fire me or whatever. I just withdraw from whatever the situation is to protect myself. So when she finished her first draft, and then she was struggling to do the rewrites, I asked her, is this something you're going to quit on as well? And sometimes as a book coach, you actually have to have those harsh questions so that people can look at themselves and say, oh my word, the way that I've come into this writing thing is showing up some of my belief systems.
So from what I'm gathering, you're less of a publisher, you're more of a mindset coach, because this is exactly where it then leads to up until somebody gets it right, and you're really shaping and getting them to accept their identity, that I'm a writer now and I don't need permission, and you're literally maybe tapping them on the shoulder and giving them that permission to be, do, and have whatever it is that they're looking for.
Exactly. I do publishing because one of the things that I found is that when you finish writing the book, then it's like, what now? A lot of people will contact me and say, I've got this manuscript. What do I do now? So my role is to create an ecosystem for them so that they don't feel lonely, because that's what happened to me. My book got finished. My friend had taken me through the initial steps, but then I didn't know where to after that. So I originally started from a coaching perspective or consulting perspective for launching your book. Then people were asking me how they can get it published. So I went that way around. And then there were a lot of people that were asking me, how do I write the book? Can you help me? And you know what? I said no to all of them. It was my husband who called me out. And that's why I say the coaches sometimes need their own coaches. And so he came to me and he said to me, Kim, do you know how to write a book? And of course I'm thinking, oh, that's an idiotic question. Obviously I know how to write a book. So I said to him, of course I know how to write a book. So he said to me, if that's the case, then why are you not helping these people? They need you. And so that was a big shift for me, that I had to then go into the space of saying, I am going to help these people to get that book written.
But someone might just be listening to this and saying, oh, I can just self-publish on Amazon for free, like you were talking about. Why would I need a book coach and, go through all of that, being shamed and all of those things? I mean, what do most people completely underestimate about this whole process?
So a lot of them treat the book like the lotto ticket. You've written the book, and now all of a sudden you're going to sit on the Bahamas sipping cocktails for the rest of your life. You're going to be like J.K. Rowling, you're going to have amusement parks named after you. And so they see it from that perspective. My role is to take them through the process and say, this is not just a book that we dump on the other side and then it's over. This is a long-term strategic goal, because if you want to turn this into a retirement plan, and it doesn't, for some people, it doesn't have to be the full retirement plan. It could just be a subsidy. Because even if you've got a retirement plan in place, your income traditionally is going to drop by at least 30%. And that means fewer cappuccinos, maybe you have to give up your gym membership, maybe you have to downsize your house, get a smaller car. There are going to be sacrifices that you're going to have to make. But if your book can just supplement that shortfall, then you can continue with the life that you have been having. And you can then also get out and speak to people. I've seen it with people who retired. The mental faculties are not the same as they were when they were working. I think that it's an intellectual and sometimes emotional death sentence to a lot of people. They underestimate what it's going to mean to them. Whereas if you're an author, you can continue doing book launches, going on podcasts, do speaking engagements. And so my role as a coach is to make you see that bigger picture, that it's not just the legacy you leave for other people. It is continuing your legacy that you are passing on every day.
You see, right now, if nobody would listen to this podcast, nobody would know what you had to go through that fatal day when you had that infection and your daughter was trying to help you put that quotation out there. Nobody's going to remember that unless you revisit that story again. But people will remember the work that you've put together in the books that you've written and in the stories that you're sharing. That will outlast you. And I can already see what you're talking about there. But in your experience, what actually changes in a person after they hit that publish? Because once they publish, now that work belongs to the world, even though it's by them, but it's their gift to the world. I mean, I'm not talking financially, but what's the internal shift that somebody now starts experiencing now that they've actually shared their story with the world?
Well, it's a little bit of a roller coaster because it's wonderful when it gets out there, but you still got to go through the process of getting the reviews, of making sure that this keeps on ticking over, that you don't just have a really great salesman, that you follow through until the end. And that's where a lot of the self-limiting beliefs come through. So I have a client who spent a huge amount of money on the book launch, on getting books printed. But when the bookstores, and this is a mental shift that's got to happen, a bookstore doesn't have a lot of space. They've got a certain number of books, shelves available. And people are launching books all the time. So they give you 90 days for that book to be on their shelf. If it doesn't get sold in those 90 days, they return the books to you and they are now shop soiled. You can't sell those books because they're not in pristine condition anymore. So you can maybe sell them secondhand. And then what happens is people withdraw. Now they're like, oh, this is not for me. What we do in our book coaching program is we work you through that phase. And we'll say the book is not the end destination. It is what you create with it. And that is a massive mental shift. And then you've also got to keep your ego in check, because sometimes your ego spikes. It goes really, really high. Like when you get a really great review or someone reads your book and they say, I can transform my life with your book. And then you get, when someone says bad things about you, then you get a dip. So now your role is to make sure that you have emotional intelligence and that you can moderate your emotions and your reactions and look at it from a long-term perspective. That is the shift that authors need to have, because it's almost like, I use this funny example. You know, when you're on a long road trip and you desperately need to get to the bathroom, and then you get home and you're like, you're trying to unlock the door, and you're like, I really, really need to go now. And then you sit down and you're like, oh, I feel so relieved now. And then that's it. Then it's over. So people have that feeling when it comes to writing the book. They've got all that anticipation. They get the book out and they're like, oh, I'm done. It has to be more than that. You have to then make sure that your brain goes from just being an author to say, I am a business owner. And what do business owners do? They continue to find readers, retain readers, and make more content.
Absolutely, because that's a whole different thing. But maybe that concept might resonate with somebody who's maybe writing things in terms of a business nature, or, you know, loose topics that have like a wider audience. But let's look at what you're currently writing at the moment. You're writing about postpartum depression. Now, this is something that is deeply personal to you, and you're being vulnerable in this new book. Now, first of all, if people don't accept it in the way that you maybe anticipate, I mean, obviously you've done the work before, but, you know, for somebody, maybe this was their first entry into writing, you know, like it would set them back a great deal, and then they would have to relieve that grief, you know, again. But how does that project that you're doing right now connect your mission around the legacy that you want to be known for?
So it's interesting because you can have a legacy for a couple of different reasons. You know, you can be known as a really great podcaster. You can be known as an author. You can be known as a speaker. You don't have to have.
Yes. Thank you. I
so you don't have to. Beautiful. Sending it more of it your way. So you don't have to just be stereotyped in a certain way. How I've blended that particular book with what I do is, although I had written a lot of fantasy books and I'd written some author guides, most of my clients that I was working with were writing deeply personal nonfiction stories, memoirs, business lessons that they learned, that kind of thing. So I decided, although I had started writing this current book a while ago, I decided this is the right time for me to finish this book. So I'm sitting on 97,000 words for this book. There are 2 chapters that I still need to write, and then I'm going to be sending it through for editing. But that then allowed me, from a legacy perspective, to then step into the very uncomfortable space that my nonfiction writers are in. because now I'm doing it with them. It's not just the process of launching the books and running a business. It is now the space of being vulnerable in the same way that my clients are vulnerable.
You know what's really fascinating about your journey? I said you moved from building brands for other companies that didn't care whether you were okay or not. But now you're helping people become the brand themselves. I mean,
Correct.
the skills never changed, but the purpose did.
Correct.
I like that. And if you're watching this right now and you're thinking, maybe I've done well, but I still feel like something is missing, I think this episode is basically going to be that mirror for you that you were searching. So I want you to type in the comments below what your biggest take has been from listening to Kim's journey today. Now, Kim, I mean, obviously, so many people, you've brought us into your world and you're very good at creating these worlds, you know, and now we're part of what you're, creating and, the legacy that you're putting out there. But what's next? What are you working on that we can now really step into and say, you know what, this is something that we want to be a part of?
So I do 2 writing retreats a year, which is exclusive. So we only allow about 10 people to come on the writers retreat. And that is from a Thursday to a Sunday. We currently are doing them in Johannesburg. We are then going to branch out into other provinces. And then we're going to choose an international destination where we're going to run the writers retreats. And that is one way that people can connect with me. The other is that I do my book coaching programs. And then I've got a little project that's sitting on the side that's just starting to emerge, that's going to help authors with the accountability and their process, which will be available to a larger community than who I can currently serve. And then, of course, we've got the YouTube channel, the Write, Learn and Earn show. So that is for people who won't necessarily be able to engage directly with me because of time constraints, but they can learn a lot of things from other authors who have written books, what their books are about, what challenges that they had. And that's a nice way to learn. And that's, in fact, the reason that I'm passionate about the YouTube channel is that is how I learned. I found an international community that had YouTube channels, and I learned a lot from them. And so that's my gift to the world, so that I'm paying it forward from what I received.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for the work that you're doing. And if you're watching this right now, you've heard it from Kim herself. She learned a great deal from YouTube. And you know what that means? That means you need to subscribe to the Online Prosperity Show so you don't miss out on any of the learnings that we've got in line for you. Now, Kim, I can't thank you enough for the work that you're doing. I mean, your life story and your experience have so much value, and the legacy that you're building and the worlds that you're creating. I think a lot of people are going to want to jump in, immerse themselves, and find themselves in all these little bits of things that you're doing. And the most interesting thing is the retreat. You get to have a holiday and you get to come back, with something tangible in your hands. And I can't wait to see where you're going to take all of this.
It's not going to be too much of a holiday because I'm going to make you work. I facilitate it. It's a lot of fun. We do have a great time, and it does feel like a break from the world, but I'm going to make you work.
Absolutely. And then they can take a safari after that, right? Forget the world for a little bit. Now, thank you so much for your time today on the show.
Super. Thank you so much for having me and for the work that you're doing to help people to reach their full potential.
Absolutely. And for those that are watching right now, I think Kim's story is a reminder that success without meaning eventually just feels hollow. It's almost Easter now, and if you're going to be eating those Easter chocolates that are shaped outside, but they've got nothing inside, that kind of feels like how a lot of people are walking around there. But she's offered us an out and given us permission to start creating a legacy, through written format. So you can write and publish your own legacy book, and she can guide you and get you published and just really help you elevate your brand with, and also build royalty income in there. So if you've ever felt there's a book inside of you, or if you've ever wanted your experience to outlive your calendar, then I think this conversation might be the nudge that you never knew you needed. So I'm going to encourage you to connect with Kim. I'll put all the details in the bottom links there, and especially follow her on her YouTube and LinkedIn profiles. As she has said, that is where she learned the most. And while you're at it, I want you to stick around, because the next episode, we're going to be diving into ideas that will help you build not just a better business, but also a happier existence. So I encourage you to maybe share this story with somebody who is looking to find themselves or still trying to find meaning in the work that they are doing. I can't wait to see what you're going to do with this information, because your life already has meaning, but I think a book is what just makes it permanent. Bye for now.